My name is Elena, and for the last few years I've felt my world shrinking. Not in a physical sense, of course. I still live in the same house my late husband, Robert, and I bought 4 decades ago. A modest, two-story home with a garden I still tend to myself. No, the shrinking was in my voice, in my presence. It felt as if the space I occupied in my own family was becoming smaller and smaller, until I was just a piece of furniture they moved around, a silent fixture in the background of their increasingly loud lives. The moment this feeling crystallized into a painful, undeniable truth was at a dinner party hosted by my only daughter, Clara, and her husband, Mark. It was Mark's promotion dinner, a gaudy affair at a restaurant far too expensive for its own good. The air was thick with the scent of truffle oil and performative laughter. I was seated at the end of the table, a strategic placement, I realized, to keep me out of the main flow of conversation. Clara was holding court, her voice a pitch higher than usual, animatedly describing their plans for a new kitchen renovation. "And of course," she said, gesturing vaguely with a wine glass, "we'll need a state-of-the-art Italian stove. Nothing less will do for Mark, the new vice president." Her friends, a collection of women with identical highlights and expressions of bored admiration, murmured their approval. Someone asked a polite question about the cost. Clara waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, it's an investment. You have to spend money to create a certain lifestyle." Her eyes flickered toward me for a fraction of a second, and I saw it all: pity, condescension, and a touch of embarrassment. To her, I was a relic of a past she was desperate to shed, a living embodiment of a life lived without Italian stoves and lifestyle investments. Later, as the conversation turned to summer vacation plans, the Maldives, Tuscany, a private yacht tour of the Greek islands, I made a quiet comment to the person next to me, a colleague of Mark's. I mentioned how Robert and I had once taken a simple but beautiful road trip through the national parks, and how the memories were more valuable than any luxury resort. It was a gentle, nostalgic thought, not meant for the whole table, but Clara's hearing was sharp when it came to sniffing out what she considered social missteps. She stopped mid-sentence and turned the full force of her attention on me. The table fell silent. "Mom," she said, her voice laced with a saccharine sweet patience that was far more insulting than outright anger, "we're talking about real travel, not camping." A few of her friends tittered. My cheeks burned with a heat I hadn't felt since I was a schoolgirl. I tried to salvage my dignity. "I was just sharing a memory, dear. It was a lovely time." That's when she delivered the blow. She leaned forward slightly, a perfectly manicured finger tapping the stem of her glass. She lowered her voice into a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mom, you're poor. It's okay. We understand. Just sit quietly. Let the adults talk." The words hung in the air, brutal and absolute. "You're poor. Sit quietly." It wasn't just an insult, it was a command. A dismissal of my entire life, my experiences, my very worth. In her world, a world of Italian stoves and Maldivian resorts, a person's value was directly tied to their bank account, and in her eyes my account was empty. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark looked down at his plate, a flicker of discomfort on his face but no courage to intervene. Clara's friends shifted awkwardly, their smiles frozen. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, some pitying, some smug. They saw a frail old woman being put in her place by her sophisticated, successful daughter. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply picked up my water glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and met my daughter's gaze across the table. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief I still carried for Robert, the loneliness of widowhood, the quiet ache of being taken for granted, it all burned away, leaving behind something cold, clear, and hard as diamond. I let her believe she had won. I let them all believe I was a quiet, poor old woman with nothing left to offer. I sat quietly for the rest of the dinner, just as she had commanded, but inside, a plan was beginning to form. A plan that had been quietly prepared by my husband for years, a final act of love and protection he had left for me. Clara had no idea that her cruel words were not an ending, but a beginning. The beginning of a lesson she would never forget. My relationship with Clara hadn't always been this way. I remember a little girl with scraped knees and a fierce love for catching fireflies in our backyard. Robert and I weren't wealthy, not by any stretch of the imagination, but we were rich in a way that mattered. We worked hard, he as a civil engineer, me as a primary school teacher, and we built a life grounded in simple principles. Save more than you spend, invest wisely but cautiously, and value people over possessions. We poured everything we had into Clara, not just money for her education, which we paid for in full, but our time, our energy, our love. We believed we were giving her a foundation, a launching pad from which she could soar. We never imagined she would use that height to look down on us. The change began when she met Mark. He came from a family with old money and new arrogance. He taught Clara to see the world not as a place of opportunity, but as a hierarchy. He introduced her to a lifestyle where brands mattered more than books, and the cost of something was its only measure of worth. Robert saw it early on. "She's forgetting where she comes from, Elle," he'd say to me after a visit from the newlyweds, his brow furrowed with worry. They talk about their portfolio, their assets, but they don't seem to be building anything real. I was more forgiving. I told myself it was a phase, that she was just trying to fit into her new world. I made excuses when she'd make casual, cutting remarks about our quaint furniture or our 20-year-old car. "It's reliable," Robert would say, patting the hood fondly. "It's an embarrassment," Clara would mutter under her breath. After Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack 2 years ago, my world tilted on its axis. The grief was a physical weight, a constant pressure on my chest. In those first few months, Clara and Mark were present, handling the funeral arrangements with an unnerving efficiency. They were there, but they weren't with me. They saw my grief as an administrative problem to be managed. They cleared out Robert's office, sorting his possessions into keep, donate, and trash piles while I was still trying to remember how to breathe without him. It was during this time that they first brought up my finances. We were in the kitchen a week after the funeral. I was staring blankly at a pile of sympathy cards. Mark cleared his throat. "Eleanor," he began, using a tone one might use with a particularly slow child, "we need to have a serious talk about your situation. Robert's pension is decent, but it's not going to be enough for you to maintain this house. The property taxes alone." Clara chimed in, placing a cool hand on my arm. "What Mark is trying to say, Mom, is that we're worried. This house is too big for you. It's a money pit. We've been looking at some lovely senior living communities, much more practical." I felt a jolt of alarm cut through the fog of my sorrow. "My home? You want me to sell my home?" "It's not your home anymore, Mom, not really. It's an asset," Mark said flatly. "An asset that needs to be liquidated to ensure you have a comfortable and affordable retirement." The message was clear. I was no longer the matriarch of the family. I was a line item on their balance sheet. A liability. I refused, of course. I told them Robert and I had planned carefully, that I was perfectly fine. They exchanged a look, a shared glance of weary frustration, as if dealing with a stubborn toddler. They didn't push it then, but the seed was planted. From that day on, every interaction was colored by their perception of my financial fragility. They treated me like a charity case. They'd bring over groceries I didn't need, loudly announcing the brand names as if to prove their generosity. They'd offer to pay for my coffee when we were out, making a grand show of pulling out a platinum credit card. Every gesture of help was a subtle reminder of my supposed dependence and their magnanimity. The worst of it was how they used their son, my grandson Liam, as a pawn. Liam was 8, a bright, sweet boy who still had the firefly-catching wonder in his eyes. He loved coming to my house, but Clara started limiting his visits. "Grandma's house is a bit old-fashioned for him, Mom. He needs more stimulation. We've enrolled him in coding camp and junior robotics." When I offered to buy him a new bicycle for his birthday, a beautiful red one I'd seen in a local shop, Clara had smiled that tight, pitying smile of hers. "That's sweet, Mom, but we've already gotten him the new VR headset. It was a fortune, but it's an educational tool, you understand?" I did understand. The message was clear. My simple, heartfelt gifts could not compete in their world of expensive technology. My love was analog in a digital world, and therefore obsolete. The dinner party was simply the culmination of 2 years of escalating condescension. It was the moment the subtext became text, spoken aloud for the world to hear. "You're poor, sit quietly." As I drove home that night, the city lights blurring through my unshed tears, I wasn't thinking about the hurt. I was thinking about Robert. I could almost hear his voice, calm and steady, as it was on the day he'd had me sign the last of the papers. "You'll know when it's time, Elle," he had said, closing the heavy leather portfolio and locking it in the safe behind the bookshelf in his study. "When they show you who they really are, you'll show them who we always were." I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the time had come. The days following the dinner party were quiet. Clara called once, a perfunctory, guilt-driven check-in. Her tone was brisk, devoid of any real warmth or apology. She didn't mention her outburst, and neither did I. It was a chasm between us, unspoken but vast. She probably thought I was at home, licking my wounds, shamed into the silence she had demanded. In a way, I was quiet, but it was the quiet of a general studying a map before a battle. My first call was to Arthur Davies, our lawyer and a friend of Robert's since college. Arthur was old school, a man whose integrity was as starched as his shirts. When I explained the situation, he didn't sound surprised. He simply sighed, a sound of weary disappointment. "I'm sorry to hear it, Eleanor. Robert always hoped it wouldn't come to this, but he prepared for it. The portfolio is in the study safe, correct?" I confirmed it was. "Good," he said. "Familiarize yourself with everything again, every deed, every certificate. Then you and I will meet. It's time to restructure the estate, your estate." That evening, I poured myself a small glass of sherry, the kind Robert and I used to share, and went into his study. The room was just as he'd left it, filled with the comforting scent of old books and wood polish. I swung open the heavy bookshelf that concealed the wall safe and spun the familiar combination. Inside, nestled between old family photo albums, was the dark blue leather portfolio. It felt heavy in my hands, a weight of secrets and deferred power. I sat at Robert's desk and opened it. The documents were meticulously organized, a testament to my husband's methodical mind. For the next 3 hours, I reacquainted myself with the life we had built in secret. It wasn't about hiding wealth. It was about protecting it from a world and a daughter that we feared would not understand its true value. The first section was property deeds. There was our home, of course, paid off for 20 years. But behind that was the deed to a small, two-bedroom apartment in the city, the one we had bought as a rental property when Clara was in high school. She knew about it, but she assumed we had sold it years ago to pay for her wedding. We hadn't. It was currently rented to a lovely young couple, providing a steady, quiet stream of income. Then there was another deed, one that would truly shock her. A charming stone cottage on the coast of Maine, purchased a decade ago. It was our sanctuary, the place we went to escape. We'd told Clara we were just renting it from a friend each summer. It was ours, free and clear. The next section was the stock portfolio. Robert was not a flashy investor, but he was a brilliant one. He had bought shares in a small, unknown tech company back in the late 90s because he believed in their vision. That company was now a global giant. He had invested in biotech and renewable energy long before they were fashionable. He held blue-chip stocks and municipal bonds. I flipped through the statements, my eyes scanning the columns of numbers. The total was staggering. Finally, there was the paperwork for the holding company Robert had established, E&R Legacy Ventures. It was a simple, elegant structure that held all our liquid assets, investments, and properties under one umbrella. And the sole director upon his passing was me, Eleanor Vance. I wasn't just a beneficiary, I was the CEO of my own life. I added it all up, my hand steady as I wrote the figures on a notepad. The city apartment, conservatively valued at $400,000. The coastal cottage, another $750,000. The stock portfolio, which fluctuated but currently sat at just over $1.1 million. The cash and other assets held in the company brought the grand total to a little over $2.3 million. I closed the portfolio and sat back in Robert's chair, the leather creaking softly. The number $2.3 million was impressive, but it wasn't the point. The point was the story it told, a story of discipline, patience, and partnership, a story of a life lived with quiet intention, not for show, but for security and peace. It was everything Clara and Mark, with their Italian stoves and leased luxury cars, failed to understand. They saw my modest home and old car and judged me as poor. They didn't see the foundation beneath it, the solid, unshakable bedrock Robert and I had built, stone by careful stone. My plan solidified. It wouldn't be a dramatic, angry confrontation. That wasn't my style or Robert's. It would be quiet, precise, and devastatingly effective. It wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about realignment, a rebalancing of the scales of respect. I would not be disinheriting my daughter. That would be cruel and it would hurt Liam. No, I would be educating her. I would give her a masterclass in the difference between being rich and being wealthy. The lesson was about to begin and tuition was going to be steep. I set the stage a week later. I called Clara. My voice was intentionally frail, tinged with a weary resignation she would easily mistake for defeat. Clara, dear, I began, I've been doing some thinking since that night. And you and Mark were right. I could almost hear her preen through the phone line. Oh, Mom, I'm so glad you're finally seeing reason. It's for the best, you'll see. This old house, it is too much for me, I continued, letting a little wobble enter my voice. The upkeep, the memories, I think it's time to sell. I'd like you and Mark to come over on Saturday. We can discuss the process. I'll need your help, of course, to figure out the next steps. The bait was taken so fast it was almost comical. Of course, Mom, we'll be there, Saturday at 10. Don't you worry about a thing. Mark knows some of the best real estate agents in the city. We'll get top dollar for it. The greed in her voice was a tangible thing. She thought she was coming to manage the liquidation of my life. She had no idea she was walking into a boardroom. Saturday morning arrived, bright and clear. I woke early, tended to my garden, and made a fresh pot of coffee. I dressed simply in a pair of tailored slacks and a silk blouse, understated, elegant, professional. When the doorbell rang at precisely 10 o'clock, I was calm. I opened the door to see Clara and Mark standing on my porch, their faces a mask of solicitous concern that couldn't quite hide the triumphant gleam in their eyes. Mark was holding a glossy folder, no doubt filled with real estate listings for lovely senior communities. Mom, you look wonderful, Clara chirped, kissing the air beside my cheek. See, making a practical decision is already taking the stress away. I led them into the living room. I had cleared the coffee table except for 3 cups and the dark blue leather portfolio. They eyed it curiously. Please sit, I said, my voice even and steady, no trace of the frail old woman from the phone call. They sat on the sofa, leaning forward eagerly. Mark opened his folder. Eleanor, I've done some preliminary research. Given the market, we can probably list the house for around $300,000. After fees and taxes, that should leave you with a nice little nest egg to set yourself up somewhere comfortable. $300,000, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air. A nice little nest egg. Exactly, Clara said, smiling brightly. It's more than enough for a beautiful one-bedroom at Silver Pines. They have a water aerobics class I think you just love. I let the silence stretch for a moment before I spoke again. That won't be necessary. I reached forward, my hand resting on the leather portfolio, because I am not selling my home, and I will not be moving to Silver Pines. Their smiles faltered, confusion clouded their faces. Mom, what are you talking about? Clara asked, her voice losing its cheerful edge. You said you were ready. I said you were right about one thing, I corrected gently. It was time for me to take the next step. I just neglected to specify what that step was. I opened the portfolio. This, I said, sliding the top document across the table toward them, is the deed to this house. As you can see, it is paid in full and held in the E&R Legacy Ventures Trust, of which I am the sole director. Mark picked it up, his brow furrowed. He read it, then read it again. E&R Legacy Ventures. What is this? I didn't answer, I simply slid the next document over. And this is the deed to the apartment on Elm Street, the one you thought I sold for your wedding. It currently generates an income of $2,000 a month. Clara's jaw went slack. You still own that. And this, I said, adding another paper to the pile, is the deed to our cottage in Maine, fully owned. Valued last year at $750,000. Mark's face was losing its color. He looked from the papers to me, his eyes wide with disbelief. What is going on, Elena? A financial review, I said calmly. I turned the page in the portfolio to the investment summaries. And this is a consolidated statement of the stock portfolio your father and I built over 40 years. As of yesterday's closing bell, its value was $1,124,000. The room was utterly silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Clara was frozen. She stared at the papers on the table as if they were venomous snakes. Her face, which had been alight with greedy anticipation just minutes before, was now a pale, slack mask of shock. She looked like she had been slapped. This was the moment. The moment from the dinner party, replayed with a devastating new script. She had told me to sit quietly. Now she was the one struck dumb, utterly silent. All told, I said, my voice cutting through the thick silence, the total assets held by the company I control are just north of $2.3 million. I paused, letting the weight of the number settle in the room. So you see, I am not poor, and I am done sitting quietly. The aftermath was not the explosion I might have expected. It was an implosion. Clara simply stared, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. Mark, the pragmatic businessman, was the first to recover, though his voice was strained. 2.3 million, he stammered. Elena, why didn't you tell us? I looked at him, then at my daughter, who was still frozen in disbelief. Why, I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Because Robert and I built this life through hard work, discipline, and privacy. We didn't believe wealth was something to be flaunted. We believed it was a tool for security, for freedom, and for doing good. It was never meant to be a weapon for status or a source of entitlement. We wanted to teach Clara the value of work, not the value of inheritance. I let my gaze rest on my daughter. A lesson I can now see that she failed to learn. Clara finally found her voice, but it was a thin, reedy whisper. Mom, I don't understand. All this time you let us think. I let you think what you wanted to think, I said, my voice hardening slightly. You saw my simple life and judged it as poverty. You saw my grief and judged it as weakness. You never once asked me if I needed help. You simply told me what I was going to do. You treated me not as your mother, but as a problem to be managed, a line item on your budget. The shame finally began to dawn on her face, followed swiftly by a desperate, panicked calculation. Her eyes darted around the room, as if seeing it for the first time, not as a shabby, outdated house, but as a small part of a vast portfolio she never knew existed. The apologies started then, a pathetic, stumbling cascade of words. Mom, I'm so sorry. The dinner party, I was stressed. I didn't mean it. You know I didn't mean it. Mark joined in, his tone shifting from shock to a fawning, oily sincerity. Elena, we've been so worried about you. We just want what's best for you. Now that we know you're secure, it's such a relief. We're a family. We should be managing this together. I held up a hand and they fell silent. There is nothing to manage together, I said firmly. I have been managing it quite successfully on my own with the help of my lawyer. The reason I called you here today was to inform you of my decisions regarding the future of my estate. I took a final set of documents from the portfolio. I have spent the last week with Arthur restructuring everything. The first change is the establishment of the Vance Family Foundation, which will be dedicated to funding educational scholarships for underprivileged children. A significant portion of the estate will be allocated to its endowment upon my passing. They both stared at me aghast. Second, I continued, I have established a trust for Liam. It will be managed by Mr. Davies and will pay for his education. The remainder will be his when he turns 30, provided he has completed a degree or a trade and has demonstrated financial responsibility. Clara's face crumpled. But what about us? She whispered. Ah, yes, you, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I have made a provision for you as well. I am not a monster. I will be depositing $5,000 into an account for you every month. A flicker of relief crossed their faces, but I wasn't finished. However, I added, that allowance is conditional. The first condition is that you both attend mandatory financial counseling and family therapy sessions, with reports sent to my lawyer. The second condition is that you will have no say whatsoever in the management of the estate or the foundation. The allowance is a gift, not a right, and it can be terminated at any time should you fail to show genuine remorse and a change in your behavior. The rest of the assets, I concluded, closing the portfolio with a decisive snap, are mine, to live on, to travel with, to enjoy as I see fit. My life is not a nest egg for your future. They left not long after that. There was no shouting, no dramatic storming out, just a stunned, hollow silence. They walked out of my house like zombies, their world completely upended. The balance of power had not just shifted. It had been fundamentally and irrevocably rewritten. In the weeks that followed, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced since before Robert died. I sold the city apartment and used the proceeds to do my own renovations on the house, not for resale value, but for my own joy. I had a beautiful, modern kitchen installed, complete with a state-of-the-art Italian stove. The irony was not lost on me. I took a trip to Maine and spent a month in the cottage by the sea, breathing in the salt air and feeling the strength return to my bones. Clara and Mark started the therapy. The first few reports from the counselor were not promising, filled with descriptions of resentment and a victim mentality, but slowly, gradually, something began to change. The calls from Clara became less about the money and more hesitant, more real. There is still a long way to go, and I don't know if our relationship will ever fully heal, but for the first time, it has a chance to be honest. The greatest change has been with Liam. With the financial strings untangled, my time with him is purely about love. We plant flowers in the garden, we bake cookies, and I tell him stories about his grandfather. I am no longer the poor grandma, I am just his grandma. The other night, sitting on my new porch, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, I thought about Robert's words, "You'll know when it's time." He knew that true wealth wasn't the money itself, but the power it gave you to protect your dignity. I am not a vengeful woman. What I did was not an act of revenge, it was an act of self-respect. I did not take away my daughter's inheritance. I gave her the one thing our money could never buy for her, a reason to look at her life and her mother, and finally see what was truly valuable. And I reclaimed my voice, not by shouting, but by speaking the quiet, unshakable truth. If Alina's story resonated with you, you're in the right place. Here at Wisdom Strikes Back, we share stories of seniors who refuse to be underestimated and prove that experience is power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that wisdom and dignity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself. Until next time, keep proving that wisdom strikes.